I'm Danielle Smith with the Alberta Enterprise Group and Common Sense Edmonton. We are interviewing candidates for the upcoming municipal election in Edmonton this fall. And joining me now is your candidate for Ward 7, Derek Hlady. Derek, why don't you tell us the name, the proper name of the ward that you're running in?
Well, hopefully I get this correct, Danielle. It's Ward sipiwiyiniwak.
And what does it mean?
River Cree is actually what it means, in Cree.
All right. Well, you have to tell us why it is you decided to put your name forward, to run for council.
Because I'm a sucker for punishment. The truth is I'm not a politician. I had zero ambition to ever become a politician. I'm happily self-employed, and but I've just seen a lot of issues that have gone on in Edmonton in the direction that it's heading in. And I just got concerned, and I'm like, well, a friend of mine suggested that I do this, and I gave it some thought and deliberated with my wife and friends, and they all felt that it would be a good job, that I'd be able to do well at it, and so here I am.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you do, the business that you run, that would make you a good councillor.
So I have, what my background is, I left high school and went to work in the oil patch, and then I did some consulting in the oil patch. Then I moved to Calgary, and I went to school for a while. And then I got a job downtown Calgary, in management of a small service company there. And then from there, I started my own, the first time I started a company up back in 2005. And did that for a couple of years. Then economically, that wasn't really working out. And so we moved up to Edmonton, and I got involved in construction in Edmonton, learning a little bit about that. And then started up in 2010, started up my company that I have now, which has gone through a few evolutions of changes based on the economic factors that we've had to try to stay in business. So, and we primarily deal with landscape construction and grading and kind of lot works, that kind of stuff. So.
All right, perfect. So give me an idea, when you're talking with constituents, what are the main issues in your ward?
So, I mean, the most of the things people talk about are the spending priorities that the city have, that they're not happy with. People don't like seeing how we're building LRTs and cutting bus routes. That was a pretty tough one for people to take. A lot of people are happy about this notion of defunding police and giving the police in a time where we have more gun crime than ever before, and yet we want to talk about reducing funding for police force because it's a political issue now. And that ridiculous solar farm that we are putting in the River Valley is not liked by anyone. I have not met a single Edmontonian that is happy about the fact that we're the only jurisdiction in North America that needs a river valley for a solar farm when we're surrounded by brownfields. So.
What would you? So let's talk about each of those because I have questions that I was going to ask you later, but since you've raised them, we may as well ask them now. Yeah. Do you think there's an opportunity to change the decision on that solar installation? What would you want to do instead?
Well, I'd like to move it. I mean, the reality is the only reason that location was chosen, EPCOR didn't look at anything else, was the cheapest place for EPCOR. EPCOR makes a ballpark $750 million a year. And their profits were put ahead of the environment, were put ahead of the Edmontonians, were put ahead of, that the River Valley is supposed to be protected from environmental, from industrial development, right? And so they, EPCOR applied for it because they're owned by the city of Edmonton, they applied for it as the city of Edmonton was applying for it, which is how they got that permit, which is a little bit underhanded on how they did it. It was a bit of a loophole in the rules. Otherwise they wouldn't have got the permit. And then the city deliberated on they had to change the zoning in order to make that work. The permit they'd already applied for, and then they had to change the zoning to make that work. And unfortunately, the real sad thing, to be honest with you, out of all the votes for changing that, because it was only brought to you by one vote, was the councillor for the ward all voted for it, right? And the mayor. And I feel like those two people, out of anyone, should have been against that project. And
all right.
Out of the rest of the council, those two for me were the most disappointing votes on that. Yeah.
All right. Let me ask you about the other issue that you'd raised on the issue of transit. So there is a number of lines already planned. What would be a different vision that you'd have for how public transportation would be rolled out?
So back prior to this administration, there was a line plan that went east to west through the White Mart.
Yeah.
We also built Terwilliger Drive to handle a multi-use corridor through there, and both of those would have been better and far cheaper candidates to run public transit. And what we're putting in now is already 20-year-old technology before we even start. My understanding, I don't have to confirm this, but my understanding is we don't even have a contract for the cars yet, and we're installing the tracks. So it just seems it's so much money that we're spending on it that could be better spent, right? I think we're up to the current budget number for it is $2.7 billion. I don't see how it doesn't save the environment. It's not an environmentally friendly project. It gets you downtown no faster than a city bus. It's just a trolley car system. So the city bus is the same speed as that. It has to stop at the lights, and it's a ridiculous waste of money. And so what do we have to gain from it, right? The gains we'll never see in the life of that transit process. We'll never see our money back from it. It's such a poor investment from a cost benefit analysis. It's such an incredibly poor investment. Probably one of the worst investments the city's ever made.
So talk to me a little bit about process and how you would change it so that you could get cost benefit analysis into the picture.
Well, I think that when they're looking at these projects, we have to stop and compare. Well, what is this costing versus what is that costing? As opposed to just looking at a single line or a single thing. Well, this is how much this costs, and I really want to have a line here. Why can't we stop and look at that? Particularly for LRT, okay, we can put this here and we can get a ballpark estimate on it. And for that money, what else could we do? And if we started looking at LRT lines and mass transit in that perspective, then maybe we'd have some better outcomes.
All right. Let me ask you particularly about the Valley Line Southeast, which has had significant delays during construction. Yeah. What is your understanding of the reason for those delays? And is there anything that you would have done differently there?
So, I mean, the line that line. I mean, they had that. There's a lot of poor planning, like many of our other lines that go into these things, right? I mean, they had that huge hunk of concrete that nobody did. Nobody checked for. If a private company ran construction projects the way the city ran construction projects, that they'd be out of business in no time, right? There's not enough planning that goes into them, and there's too much politics and not enough planning that goes into where we decide to do things, right? So instead of doing things that make fiscal sense, we do things that make sense on a map or make sense for somebody's political career or whatever. So,
do you have anything from the construction industry and your experience there that you think would be a different approach that you could bring to how these projects are contemplated at the city level?
Well, a lot of these things. So I think that we lack in our planning committee. We lack. There's always the excuse that, well, none of us have ever worked construction before. Okay, well, that's fair. I know no city councilor is expected to have knowledge in construction, but then shouldn't we be guided by a project management office that has that knowledge, right? Shouldn't that then be our guiding thing as to how we're planning these projects out, right? Why are then we leaving the planning of these projects out to people that have no construction experience? It doesn't seem to make sense, right? So that's probably the reason why our cost per square footage when we do something is the highest in the region compared to any other. Anybody else builds a building, their costs are lower than us. So,
All right. Well, let me then move over to the operating side and talking about operational spending. So first of all, just looking at overall operational spending, do you think that the city's spending too much, too little, or do they have it about right?
Well, it's not about how much we're spending, though, is it? Like it's more about how we're spending it, right? I mean, we have been rated repeatedly as to way too much top-heavy management. We have some managers in the city that manage one person, right? And so, I mean, clearly there's a layer of management that we could take out. Frontline staff, of course, we need, because we keep making cuts to the services, and that, that seems wrong. Why are we making cuts to the people that are actually doing the work, right? I mean, certainly we need the work done, right? So perhaps we need to look at our ratio of managers versus staff, and try to make efficiencies that way, as opposed to cutting frontline staff.
Do you think that there's any need for wage austerity on the front lines? There's been a lot of wage rollbacks that have taken place in the private sector. And oftentimes with union contracts, you get automatic increases just as you go up the pay scale. Do you think there's any issues there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would have to look at it. You'd have to look at it more on a case by case basis. But certainly, we should have a wage freeze if we had a 5-year wage freeze. I haven't taken an increase in the last 5 years. I'm not sure. I think that most people I know haven't had a wage increase since our oil price went down in 2016. So I don't know why, if you work for the city, you continue to get a wage increase every year. So.
You talk about, are we doing the right things? What do you think the core function is of municipal government, and what do you think might be things that the city's doing they should look at not doing anymore?
Well, so I don't like seeing the cut in services, right? So when I talk to Edmontonians, what do we want? We want our roads fixed, we want our parks cleaned, we want our grass cut, we want our dandelions sprayed, we want a safe streets for people to walk on, for people to be on, right? We have to do something about the level of violence at LRT stations. I know they've started trying to address some of that, and amongst other things, we have to pay attention to those things. We have to make Edmonton a pleasant place to live in. We can't just make it more expensive and be taking out services, right? I mean, that's where I feel like we've been going for the last while. So where's that money going? And it's all got to come from somewhere. And when we look at our cost, our staff, our wages in Edmonton over the last 8 years have gone up an astounding 50% over 8 years. And we don't have 50% more people, so why do we have 50% more salaries out in the city? That's an insane number. Mm-hmm. And with that, why do we keep losing services then? Right. So where's this money going? I guess that's the bigger question. And I realize it's a complex thing, and I'm not in government right now. I don't have a detailed version of the budget. I can only look at what they print online, and can only go by that. And certainly a deeper dive into things would be necessary. Mm-hmm.
All right. Whenever you start talking about wage austerity, people will say, what about council members? Should there be some wage austerity there? Do you think that council members, when you look at their full compensation package, do you think it's fair, or do you think it should be reduced?
Well, I don't think I agree. Why should council members get a raise? What do they need a raise for? If nobody else is getting a raise, why should council members get a raise? I don't understand why council members get a car allowance. I don't get a car allowance to get myself. Why do we have to pay council members who are going to make driving for you and me more expensive? Why do we pay them a car allowance and give them parking downtown? So, I have zero problem with rolling back city councilor wages too, or putting a freeze, or matching or bettering what you expect for the staff to do, for sure.
All right, let's then talk about the other side. So you're concerned about the potential cut in services, but tell me how you're feeling about the tax picture. Do you think that the taxes are the right level, or too much or too little?
Taxes, as in personal property taxes, because our business.
Well, let's deal with them in parts. So talk to me about residential property taxes first.
So our residential property tax, we've had increases every year for over a decade, right? We've had, other than this year, they said there's no increase, which is kind of a bit of not really true. It's there's still levies and increases. It's just they've just done it differently. They didn't change the mill rate, and so that they called that a no tax increase. But our city of Edmonton taxes. I know there's people talking about wanting a rollback in the residential taxes. I'm more inclined to think I'd rather instead of promising people a rollback and saving somebody $100 a year, I'm more inclined to say I'd rather see their service levels go back up. And I think that what people get most upset about is more the value that they're getting and don't feel like they're getting the value for dollar that they should be getting. So residential tax rates, we're still lower than St. Albert. I think we're on par-ish with Calgary. And so our residential rate is probably somewhat reasonable. I'd be more inclined to say that we would want to increase services rather than roll back.
Okay, so then let's deal with the other side. What about corporate taxes or the non-residential rate?
So non-residential rate is too high for sure, and we drive business out of the region all the time. And so the city seems to have no concept of the fact that people have all the bedroom communities that they can move their businesses to. And that doesn't seem to factor into any of their decisions. So if we're talking about just to keep it on the corporate tax rate, there's a lot of businesses that we've manufacturing and construction businesses that they've just said, well, they'll just move to Nisku, or they'll just move to Atchison, or they'll just move wherever, and they'll pay county taxes and not bother paying Edmonton taxes, even though. And so you just buy an Edmonton business license and continue to work and use Edmonton roads, but not have to pay Edmonton taxes. So
that would be your priority. Do you have some thought about how you'd be able to reduce those taxes? I mean, some municipalities talk about pegging the amount of the non-res rate relative to the residential rate, like 1.5 times the size or 2 times the size. Well, do you have some thought about what the target should be?
I'm going to just say that I don't have a number. So I think I like the idea of pegging it to the residential rate. I don't have a number to give you.
Okay, no problem. Let's talk about new tax increases. From time to time, whenever there's a city charter discussion, it often is accompanied by a discussion about how, because of the additional services that the big cities have to provide, that maybe they need new tax revenues and a new form of taxes. How do you feel about that? Do you think there should be?
Well, the city seems to always find new ways to tax it. They call it photo radar, or they call it their tensor program, or they call it, they're continually doing things that they don't call taxes as increased taxation. So are you referring to the federal transfers or the provincial transfers, or?
Well, in some jurisdictions, they've got land transfer taxes. In some jurisdictions, they've got parking space taxes. In some jurisdictions, they add on a hotel tax. Those are some of the ideas that have been presented in the past or contemplated in the past.
I think I'd have to look at that more detailed and to be able to give you an answer to say which would be better or not. I mean, certainly we have to make up. We can't just drop our revenue, right? We can't just without severely, cutting services. We can't just immediately drop revenue. So we do have to work. We do definitely have to address the fact that Edmonton needs to be more competitive to get more businesses in the city, and so what's required to get that money. I'd have to look at more.
Okay. Detail. Let's talk about the economy, because obviously when you've got a growing economy, growing businesses within boundaries, growing residential communities, that will increase revenues. So do you have some thoughts on how the economy is doing, where you think it's going to go? Do you feel some optimism, or are there some concerns?
So from everything I've looked at, we can probably expect a 2-year positive blip from us once the COVID restrictions are gone, right? There's pent up. People want to spend money. They want to go out, and so there should be a 2-year blip. Now, where we go after that, it's Alberta, and things have been pretty murky. We can't seem to get a pipeline built, and we can't seem to, our oil. I mean, I know that there's some big oil sands revenue still coming in, but a lot of that is no longer construction oriented revenue, right? And so it doesn't require the same level of staff or service. It's just more. It helps the corporate company. It's not as bringing the money into the economy the same way as construction revenue would. Now, that new hydrogen plant they announced would be beneficial for Edmonton for sure. The Amazon plant is good for the region, right? There's things like that. I know there's talk about a tech sector, a tech corridor that would be good for the region, and so I mean, there's hope. I guess finally, since 2016, there finally does seem to be tingle of hope on the horizon, but we'll have to see how it plays out.
When you're talking about business attraction, do you have some suggestions for how you would do it? For instance, some municipalities look at doing direct subsidies, others look at cutting red tape and paperwork, others look at changing and having differential tax rates. Do you have a preference for how that should be done?
Not a fan of subsidies.
Okay.
Not a fan of corporate welfare and subsidies, direct subsidies. I cutting red tape, absolutely. Reducing licensing and permitting fees and those kinds of things. That I'm more of a fan of that. I'm not a huge fan of handing private corporations money. Right? It's still a capitalist economy, and if certainly during COVID there was some exceptions made, I guess, for some stuff, but for the most part, I feel like a business needs to be sustainable on its own, and so
Okay.
attracting business should be about attracting business here should be about cutting red tape and making it easier for them to do business.
All right, let's talk then about a housing strategy. So when I say the term affordable housing, what does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, affordable housing. So if you're talking about like a lower income affordable housing, that's that type of affordable housing, or keeping housing affordable without driving up property values because of poor policy.
You tell me. Like, what do you think the bigger concern is? Because it could also be homelessness as well. So we can talk about all of those. But where do you think the problem is?
Well, so there's a couple of problems. I mean, the subsidized housing, affordable housing market, we do have. I mean, we are investing in that. I mean, clearly there's still a lot to be done as far as homelessness goes, and as far as the those programs. I mean, we've got more homeless on the street, not less, right? Clearly, our 10-year plan to end homelessness has failed miserably. But we do have, I mean, there are provincial and federal programs. There are a number of organizations. I feel like we need a bit of a blanket, as far as the homeless thing goes. I feel like we need a bit of a blanket oversight and more coordinated effort. I don't know that there's enough collaboration on a lot of those things. So we could probably be better served with some of that, so that there's some areas where there's redundancies we could get rid of, would allow us to free up more funds to be able to to look after the direct problems. Now, as far as keeping prices affordable, well, we have to look at that city plan, and there's some big flaws in our current city plan that is going to ultimately, over time, really severely drive up housing prices in the city.
Tell me why you say that.
Well, the densification plan. I mean,
Yeah.
Densification at all costs. I mean, there's not one highly dense city that has low property values, right? And so the idea is, I mean, you think about for most people, your home is your significant investment. It's your way to retire. It's your and so that we need to maintain that. And if single family homes are going to be unaffordable in Edmonton, people are just going to be buying them in Leduc or Spruce Grove or St. Albert, that aren't into this densification at all cost thing. So we also do a really poor job with community engagement when it comes to those things. And so I believe that we need a mix of properties, with some of the new properties we have where they've got businesses on the bottom and then apartments or condos above the businesses. Those things are fantastic. I love that people have options. I think that in our post-pandemic world, we're going to see a less need for office space. Right? People have realized they can use a hybrid model. They can work from home, or they can do some sort of work from home. And we probably don't need as much office space we had before. So there's an opportunity there to convert some of the older office buildings into residential, which again would help us tremendously with the affordable housing, because these are buildings that are already up. So converting an office building into a condo, the cost per unit would be considerably less, and we could use that for these affordable housing options. Helps us with densification without stepping on people's toes, right? I think our community engagement, or what we quote unquote call community engagement, is typically we have a plan. We tell you what our plan is. we listen to you complain about our plan, and then we carry through with our plan anyway. And so I think that community engagement needs to be actual community involved planning was the thing that I've been talking to people about. Right?
All right. Let me ask you about the 15-minute community, because that seems like a pretty compelling concept, that you'd want to have amenities close by in every community. What do you think that means in your ward? Are there areas that you think are lacking, that need a priority for making sure that those services exist?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. We, in a lot of the older, everything was RF1, right? And they built a bunch of these older neighborhoods that were based around having a big yard and a small house and driving to all the things. And certainly that plan, well, it seemed like a good plan in the 50s and 60s, didn't really pan out for us long term, right? So certainly we have to address that. I love the idea of the 15-minute communities. I like the idea that there's more businesses within walking distance or biking distance, or, you don't have to get in your car and park at a big box store for everything you need. So I certainly think that some of those things, and again, when I say that I don't like the city plan, it's not that I don't like the entirety of the city plan. It's that there's parts in that city plan that I just feel are going to be counterproductive long term.
All right. Let me ask you about Blatchford, because the city has taken on the role of the developer there. Do you think that is a wise move, or do you think that should be approached differently?
Yeah, I don't think the city has any business being the developer in there. I think that needs to be a private investment. I don't think that's the city's job.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the private sector. The half of garbage collection is already privatized, and there's conversation about privatizing the delivery of golf courses. Are there any services that you think would be candidates for that? What role do you think the private sector should be in providing some public services?
I don't mind looking at some of this stuff as far as on a case by case basis, as far as switching it over to private. I mean, we have tried some of that stuff in the past, and it's lent itself to lower levels of service for people. And so any of the areas that we look at, if we were to look at parks, for instance, right? If we were to privatize that, if we could make that, I'm just saying as an example, if we could make that work where we were getting the same or better levels of service and it was saving us money, then it would make sense. But ultimately, a lot of those things, I think that we could probably be better off finding efficiencies rather than privatization.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about public transit. Let's talk about commuter traffic. Council dropped the residential speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour. Some think it should go even lower to 30 kilometers per hour. What's your thought?
So I mean, I have mixed thoughts on it, right? I mean, for one, obviously we want to keep safer streets, and every time you hear about somebody getting hit by a car at any speed, or is tragic, right? So, but ultimately, I feel like being the only jurisdiction in Alberta that has a lower than the norm speed limit is just going to lend itself to a ton of photo radar and a ton of other tickets for people that aren't from the city, right? You come here from anywhere else, and all of a sudden you get home and you've got $3,000 worth of photo radar tickets in the mail. I don't feel like that's fair. And so I know there'll be signage, and I realize there's going to be some time span before they start enforcing it. But ultimately, to me, it comes across as, like many of the other things, it just comes across the way to increase photo radar revenue as the end goal of that, rather than actual safety. So if we're making laws for safety, I'm all for it. If we're making laws to create another tax for driving, then I'm not. So.
All right. I'm looking at a picture of the new think tank downtown library. So do you love it or do you hate it?
The battleship?
I guess actually, now that you mention it, I thought it did kind of look like a tank, but I guess you could say it looks like a battleship. What do you think?
So I think Calgary did a much better job with their library than we did.
Oh no! Do you want to reconsider that answer?
If you put the two pictures side by side, it's hard to pick Edmonton. So we got Connor McDavid. I don't know what to say. We got definitely have a prettier library.
All right, let me just talk to you in the last couple of questions here about how you see the role as an elected council member. There is going to be a referendum on the ballot. It's a province-wide issue on equalization. How do you feel about referenda? Do you think that there are some issues that should be put directly to the people, or do you prefer to make the decisions as the elected council member?
I like referendums. I think referendums are fantastic. I mean, the whole role of council is to represent, of any council or any government is supposed to be to represent the will of the people. And oftentimes that's not the case. So when you actually get a referendum and a chance to vote on those things, I'm all for it. I know that some of the U.S. elections, the ballot gets really long with a number of issues, but at least you get the will of the people, right? Rather than the will of the politician. So.
All right. And final question, because from time to time, administration will propose a solution or a policy that they say will be best for the city as a whole, but your constituents might want you to vote differently. What would you do in those circumstances?
Well, I'm not a politician, so my goal my goal is to do what's in the best interest of the people that voted for me. That's and so ultimately, I mean, unless it was something that I felt really strongly about, but the opposite direction, I would do what the people wanted, because that's, as far as I'm concerned, what my job should be, right? So.
Well, let me ask you then one more thing, because you are elected as an independent, but to get any policies passed, you have to convince 7 council members in total to go along with you on an idea. Give me some thoughts on how you would approach that issue to build that coalition.
Well, that's the only reason I'm running in municipal politics. And if I had to be part of a party system, I would not be interested personally, right? And so, because I like the idea of it being independent, I like that, because you have 13 people and you have to get 7 of them to agree in order to pass anything. I think that's fantastic. I think that the diversity is wonderful. I love working with people. I'm a natural problem solver. I'm a middle child, and making, getting input from both sides and coming up with solutions that work for everybody has been something I've been doing all my life. So that part of it seems easier than in a party system where I have to try to get people that are sworn to disagree with me to agree with me. Right? So.
All right. Thank you so much for the conversation. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
That is your candidate for Ward 7, sipiwiyiniwak, Hlady.